Welcome back to the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? We're back at it again, and today I'm going to be reacting to Joe Biden's press conference. Now, there's been some clips. I don't form opinions based off clips personally. I think it's fine to say, yeah, the clip looks bad, but I'm not going to form an opinion about his performance, his demeanor, without seeing the entire press conference. So let's react to it. And last time I talked about Trump and Biden. I'm gonna be very objective in terms of a few things and take into consideration another aspect of it that I should value more, and at the very least, when I portray it to you, the audience, and that is like the optics of it and the cognitive capability versus the potential authoritarian regime. Like there is reasons why, and I'm gonna be honest with you, Trump supporters, because I'm gonna try to be nicer moving forward. I don't like Trump as president. I don't like it at all, and it has nothing to do with bias. I just think Trump would be a terrible president, and I could break that down for you for a future video. That's fine. But Joe Biden has a lot of issues as well, and I think at some point we'll see how this goes.
In a hypothetical matchup against Trump, Harris 49, Trump 46. The president set to take questions live. Again, an unscripted moment for him. Mary Bruce, you're in that room.
I'm going to make this 1.25 speed, people.
It certainly is, David. It has been 8 months since we have seen the president come on a stage like this alone to face reporters, and he is under an intense microscope here tonight. The president well aware of that, David.
Mary Bruce, our chief white. Here comes President.
Well, good evening. We just concluded this year's NATO summit, and the consensus among the members was it was a great success. It's especially momentous because it represented the 75th year, the most important military defense and alliance in the world's history of the world. We should never forget that NATO grew out of the wreckage of World War II, the most destructive war in history. The idea was to create an alliance of free and democratic nations that would commit themselves to a compact of collective defense.
Okay, together, not bad so far.
They knew we'd all be safer. An attack on one would be treated as an attack on all. And it's worked because a would-be aggressor knows they attack one of us, they'll be attacked by all of us. Sending that message is the best way to deter aggression and prevent wars in the first place. For those who thought NATO's time had passed, they got a rude awakening when Putin invaded Ukraine. Some of the oldest and deepest fears in Europe roared back to life because once again, a murderous madman was on the march. At this time, no one cowered in appeasement, especially the United States. We collected intelligence that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine months before the invasion. I directed the intelligence community to be a significant amount of intelligence to be declassified so I could start building an international coalition to oppose the invasion.
Okay, a little hiccup, but okay, we're still rolling.
Some of you remember, I warned the world that the invasion was imminent. I rallied a coalition of 50 nations from Europe to Asia to help Ukraine defend itself. Many foreign policy experts thought, as Putin amassed Russian forces just 100 miles north of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, but Putin thought it was the mother home of Russia. The capital would fall in less than a week. But the Ukrainian people, backed by a coalition to help build, stopped them. Today, Kyiv still stands, and NATO stands stronger than it has ever been. During the week of this summit, several heads of states made it a point in their statements to thank the United States and to thank me personally for all that NATO has achieved. NATO is not only stronger, NATO is bigger because we led the charge to bring in Finland and Sweden into the alliance. And it makes a gigantic difference. Excuse me.
Okay.
Meanwhile, my predecessor has made it clear he has no commitment to NATO. He's made it clear.
All right, time for the so far now he's about to start, going at Donald Trump, some uppercuts, some haymakers. So far so good. A few hiccups. So far so good. He speaking with some tone, speaking pretty clear. Okay. So let's see how this resumes.
That he would feel no obligation to honor Article 5. He's already told Putin, and I quote, do whatever the hell you want. In fact,
Article 5. What is Article 5? Let's read it. Read Article. Would I find it here? Oh, here we go. Shout out the Constitution. For the most convenient management of the general interest of the United States, delegates shall be annually appointed in such manner as the legislators of each state shall direct to meeting Congress on the first Monday in November. Okay. And every year with a power reserved to each state to recall its delegates or any of them at any point within the year and to send others in their stead for the remainder of the year. No state shall be represented in Congress by less than 2 nor more than 7 members. What does this have to do? What did he say?
NATO. He's made it clear that he would feel no obligation to honor Article 5. He's already told Putin, and I quote, "Do whatever the hell you want."
Is Article 5 the right article? This one looks like it's talking about delegates. Shall send an embassy to receive it. Maybe it's a different article. Maybe it's a different article. Or maybe I'm misconstruing what he's saying.
In fact, the day after Putin invaded Ukraine, here's what he said. It was genius. It was wonderful. Some of you forgot that, but that's exactly what he said. But I made it clear, a strong NATO is essential to American security. And I believe the obligation of Article 5 is sacred. And I remind all Americans, Article 5 is invoked only once in NATO's long history, and that was to defend America after 9/11.
Article 5? Is this the Article 5 of NATO? Wait, what?
Invoked only once in NATO. And I remind all Americans, Article 5 is invoked only once in NATO's long history.
What Article 5 is he talking about? I'm so confused. Am I missing something? We're here, we're learning together, ladies and gentlemen. Retain its sovereignty, mutual friendship among the people of different states. Shall send an embassy to or receive an embassy from. No more shall enter into a treaty confederation raised by any state for the common defense. All officers, blah blah. All charges of war, blah blah. And shall have the sole determining peace and war. Maybe it's Article 9. Maybe Article 9 is what he's talking about. With you. All right, I'm just gonna. I don't know.
And that was to defend America after 9/11. I made it clear that I will not bow down to Putin. I will not walk away from Ukraine. I will keep NATO strong. That's exactly what we did, and exactly what we'll continue to do. Now, the future of American policy is up to the American people. This is much more than a political question. It's more than that. It's a national security issue. Don't reduce this to the usual testament that people talk about, issues of being a political campaign. It's far too important. It's about the world we live in for decades to come. Every American must ask herself or himself, is the world safer with NATO? Are you safer? Is your family safer? I believe the American people know. The answer to all those questions is yes. And I believe the American people understand that America is stronger because of our alliances.
Okay.
I believe the American consensus from Truman to Reagan to me still holds today. America cannot retreat from the world. We must
Agreed.
lead the world.
Okay.
We're an indispensable nation, as Madeleine Albright wrote. Now let me turn to 3 other key issues. Just this morning, we had a great economic report.
Okay, so opening statement. I think he did well. I think he did well. Like 2 hiccups, but other than that, well, strong message. The point was that America should be and NATO should be strong. They should be allied with one another. They should be an influence to promote peace. I get all that. Okay.
Showing inflation is down.
Inflation is
Overall prices
down.
fell last month. Core inflation showing inflation is down. Just this morning, we had a great economic report showing inflation is down.
Inflation is down. Okay.
Overall prices fell last month. Core inflation is the lowest it's been in 3 years. Prices are falling for cars, appliances, and airfares.
Core inflation is the. I mean, what's the okay? I don't want to be this guy, but what's the point of fact checking everything Biden says if Donald Trump can lie on the stands and nobody cares. So I'm not gonna fact check everything Biden's gonna say. I think it's pretty much irrelevant in this presidential election, unfortunately, to say. I think truth should matter, but it doesn't matter. Regardless, I'll pay attention to what he's saying, the power of what he's saying, and how he appeals to the people. Beyond me, like understanding politics, how does he appeal to the general populace, and like how is that message being received? That's what I'll focus on in this particular speech.
Grocery prices have fallen since the start of the year. We're going to keep working to take down corporate greed to bring those prices down further.
Okay, people like
Trump's calling for a 10%
bringing down
tariff on
corporate
everything
greed.
Americans buy, including food from overseas, vegetables, and other necessities. And economists tell us that would cost the average American working family another $2,500 a year. It's a tax of $2,500.
Trump adding tariffs
Second,
will be
our efforts to secure
making
the
things
border
more
and southern border
expensive.
is working.
Okay.
After Trump killed the bomb.
Oh, what do you say?
Our efforts to secure the border, southern border, is working. A year. Second, our efforts to secure the border, southern border, is working.
Our efforts to secure the
After
southern
Trump
border.
killed the bipartisan effort to secure the border, Republicans and Democrats had worked on, because he thought it would benefit me and make him a loser, Republicans walked away.
Okay.
So I took executive action last month. As a consequence, working with Mexico, border encounters have gone down over 50%. The current level is lower today than when Trump left office.
A little Trump jab. What do y'all think about that?
Third, for months, the United States has been working to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, to bring the hostages home, to create a path for peace and stability in the Middle East. 6 weeks ago, I laid out a detailed plan in writing. It was endorsed by the UN Security Council, the G7. That framework is now agreed on by both Israel and Hamas. So I sent my team to the region to hammer out the details. These are difficult, complex issues. There's still gaps to close. We're making progress. The trend is positive, and I'm determined to get this deal done and bring an end to this war, which should end now.
Biden is doing well. I'm not gonna lie. So far, he's doing well. He's doing way better than he did in the presidential debate so far.
Our leadership matters. Our partnerships matter. This moment matters. We must rise to meet it. With that, I'll take your questions. I've been given a list of people to call on here. Reuters, Jeff Mason.
Okay, the Q&A session. His speech, his opening statement, all of that. Thumbs up. Thumbs up. It was good. Let's see how he answers all the questions. Let's see if it responds well. Let's see if the subject matter, if it would impact the general audience. Let's really diagnose those things.
Mr. President, your political future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision on whether to stay in the race was still open. George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside.
Bringing up George Clooney, and that's such a weird thing. George Clooney and a bunch of lawmakers. What does George Clooney have to do with anything?
Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments
Okay,
into your
nice
decision
clap
to
back.
stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, so I think she's not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one.
I heard it. I heard it. I heard it. Bad hiccup. That's why it's clipped. Bad hiccup right there. Let's see what the rest of the stuff he says. Saying Vice President Trump, again, he's speaking too fast. And he caught himself in a weird situation where he called Kamala Harris Vice President Trump. He was asked a question. I don't know. I can't excuse that. It was a bad hiccup. Bad hiccup. Optics matter, and that one hiccup, people are going. It's going viral. So yeah, that wasn't good. And that was the first question. Not good. Not good so far. But let's see the answer.
The fact is that the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. Secondly, the idea, I served in the Senate a long time. The idea that senators and congressmen running for office worry about the ticket is not unusual. And I might add, there are at least 5 presidents running or incumbent presidents who had lower numbers than I have now, later in the campaign. So there's a long way to go in this campaign. And so I'm just going to keep moving. And because, look, I got more work to do. We've got more work to finish. There's so much, we've made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world. Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We've created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million. I mean, so things are moving. We got more to go.
Another hiccup right there. I mean, it was a small one, right?
That's manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million. I mean, so think.
So 1.5 million something. We're just gonna skirt past. I don't know what he was trying to say there.
We're moving. We got more to go. Working class people still need help. Corporate greed is still at large. Their prices, the corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down, and so I'm optimistic about where things are going.
Okay, so the big hiccup is the Vice President Trump. I saw clips. My friends of mine who don't know nothing about politics sent me the clips of that. And after seeing the full response, I mean, the full response was pretty good. I mean, if he didn't have the one hiccup at the beginning, like, nobody would say anything about his response, but he did. So it's like, it was an okay response, bad hiccup. I would go like around here in terms of response plus hiccup. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't good in terms of being exceptional, but it definitely
Danny Kemp, AFP.
could have been better.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about you mixed up Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the President of France, the German Chancellor, having to step in and make excuses for you on that. Officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing by leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, here, I mean, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden, because Biden did the following. Look, folks, this is
Okay, pat yourself on the back.
I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time, and find me a world leader who didn't think it was. Next one.
Okay, response. I seen the clip regarding Zelensky misnaming them. I guess there's a better terminology for that. That definitely didn't look good, but I think his response here was solid towards the question, saying that all these world leaders were thanking me. It was a very successful conference. He repeated it like 3 times, but I have to numb my expectations for presidential debates for this one with Biden and Trump. So, solid response.
Sorry, Nancy Cordes, CBS.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned other instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge, but what makes this moment in history so unique is that it is not your enemies who are calling on you to reconsider your decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about what it would mean for your legacy, which you've worked decades to build, if you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit to return to the Oval Office?
Well, look, I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably, many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up. What are you hearing now? from mainstream economists.
Okay.
16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job. And under my plan so far and what's going to happen in the future if I'm reelected, that things are going to get much better. Our economy is growing. I was determined when I got elected to stop the trickle-down economic theory, that if the wealthy did very well, everybody else would do well. My dad was a well-read, decent guy. I don't remember much trickling down on his kitchen table. Middle-class people and working-class people need help. And so what happened is I decided
Appeal to the
implement
working
what I was
class,
able to do
okay.
as president, what I believed when I was a senator. And that is that the way to build this economy is from the middle out and the bottom up. That
Okay.
way we grow the economy. And the wealthy still do very well. They do fine. And guess what? Find me an economist, mainstream economist, and say we haven't done well. What have we?
So a lot of the things that he's doing as like a tactic, which is very interesting, and hold yourself up for scrutiny, but the only people who will look up that scrutiny are the same or the people who really know about politics, right? You're appealing to the people who don't know a lot about politics, who are really just listening to see how you can appeal to their general everyday needs, because it wouldn't make sense for you to like overtly scrutinize like potential lies and misconceptions that Joe Biden says and not to do the same thing for Donald Trump. That would be hypocrisy, right? So that's why I'm not really doing it. I could fact check everything. I'm not doing that for this election. But the point he made, or the points he keeps making about, look what these people are saying about me, my notoriety, my success, what I've been doing speaks for itself. I don't have to tell you. I wonder if that's a strategy implemented because you can't explain what you're doing, or strategy implemented to adhere to the people as individuals, as entities that allows you as an individual to speak the greatness of me as your president. So I'm curious about that.
I'm working right now. And so we got more to do, though. We got to finish the job. And by the way, I come from the corporate state of the world. Delaware has more corporations registered in Delaware than every other state in the nation combined. I'm not anti-corporate.
Little hiccup.
Corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. Doubled. It's time things get back in order a little bit. It's time. For example,
So what was the point he's
the
making
nation
here?
combined. I'm not anti-corporate, but corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic.
Oh, so the point he's making is I want people to be wealthy if they're wealthy. I'm not anti-corporate, but we gotta make sure that the corporate are paying their dues. That's the point he's making.
It's time things get back in order a little bit.
Okay.
It's time, for example, if I'm reelected, we're going to make sure that rents are kept at 5% increase in corporate rents for apartments and the like homes are limited to 5%. We're going to make a lot of changes that I've been talking about. because we're
Good
gonna
point.
continue
Little
to grow this
hiccup in the
economy.
beginning, but
And by
good
the
point.
way,
Interesting. Good
I
point
know,
for the
remember how I got
people who are
so
struggling with rent.
being so pro-union, not labor, union. Well, guess what? I've been the most pro-union labor president in history. Not a joke. And guess what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better. Everybody does better. And we talk about
Well, did he say when unions do better, everybody does
how,
better?
for
Let me
example,
hear this.
Everybody, what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better.
The fact that he is deliberately changing his tone to highlight certain things that he's saying and emphasize certain things that are important. It shows a level of competency. I know you guys don't want to hear it, but it does show a level of competency. I know you guys want to, hate, but
And we talk about how, for
that's
example,
not what I'm here to do.
Remember when we talked about getting the computer chip industry back in the United States? Used to be 40% of the industry. We invented the chip. 40% of the industry is in the United States. And former presidents decided that the best way to do it is find the cheapest labor in the world, send the product over there, and import what the product was. And so what did I do? I was told not to go over to Europe, to Asia, including Europe, but Asia. And I remember going to South Korea, convincing them to invest $20 billion in the United States to build computer chip factories. And I asked why when they finally decided to do it. And the answer was because you have the safest economy in the world, and you have the best workers in the world. So the whole idea here is we've invested, there's been over $50 billion in investment in computer chip manufacturing just coming into being. None of you thought that would happen. None of you thought that would happen. But it's happening. It's happening. It's going to grow economies. all through. And by the way, red states and blue states. Matter of fact, there's as much in red states and blue states. I've made no distinction. So my generic point is that the idea that we can't continue to build and grow the economy, make it fairer. And like I said, from my standpoint, when the middle class does well, that's when the whole economy grows. The poor have a shot, the wealthy do well. But the wealthy got to start paying their taxes.
As a follow-up, sir, you mentioned that your Vice President Kamala Harris
Probably his best response to a question so far. Okay, not bad.
would be ready to serve on day one. Can you elaborate on that? What is it about her attributes and her accomplishments over the last 4 years that make her ready to serve on day one if necessary?
First of all, the way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over the bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought prosecutor. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have
She's a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. A little mumbling, but I heard it.
picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her.
Okay. Short, sweet. You don't need to expand too much.
Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. The presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
The limits I've acknowledged I have.
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true.
Okay.
What I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you look at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore. I've done, where's Trump at? Riding around his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I don't know how many, don't hold me to it, roughly 20 major events, some with thousands of people showing up. And so,
I don't know. Let me see how much left is. So this will go up until the end of the stream. So this will go up to like 3:30. So we've been having about an hour. This is probably gonna be a long video. So far, he has been performing well. Like, so far, he has been having good answers, very clear. Obviously, the mistake of saying Vice President Trump was disgusting, but so far so good. I'm surprised. I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I actually thought it would be much worse. I thought it would be as bad as the presidential debate, but he's performing better than that. The hiccups are still nasty, and I'll be very clear, if I had my pick, Biden and Trump would not be candidates, but for some reason, y'all wanted Trump, and of course, the person who beat Trump last time was Biden, and he's the incumbent. So if Trump wasn't on the ballot, I don't think Biden would have reran. I think they would have let some other Democratic nominee. But the fact that Trump was on the ballot, and Biden was the best person to take on Trump. That's what I believe.
I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just got to just pace myself a little more. Pace myself. In the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling into 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. At the very end, I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway, I'm sorry, Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons.
I wonder if I'm able to watch that NATO summit conference. I feel like it's going to be long. but I feel like it needs to be watched at the same time. So I wonder if I could watch the full thing.
Saying that in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on Felicia's question there, leaders of your own party have said that they're not worried about that debate. They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that. How can you reassure the American people that you are up to the task and that there won't be more bad nights at a debate stage or somewhere else?
First thing,
I'm very curious on his answer to the Ukraine question, especially considering we shouldn't have a vested interest to help Ukraine win the war, but we should have a vested interest to help Ukraine end the war, right? So those are two different things. So I'm curious to see how he answers that. And then obviously, you know, he's gonna talk about, oh yeah, man, look what I'm doing. I'm good. That was a bad performance. So
about Zelensky asking for the ability to strike deep into Russia. We've allowed Zelensky to use American weapons in the near term, in the near or abroad, into Russia. Whether or not he should be attacked. For example, should Zelensky, he's not. If he had the capacity to strike Moscow, strike the Kremlin, would that make sense? It wouldn't. The question is, what's the best use of the weaponry he has, the weaponry we're getting to him? I've gotten a more long-range capacity, as well as defensive capacity. And so our military is working. I'm following the advice of my commander-in-chief, the chief of staff of the military, as well as the Secretary of Defense and our intelligence people.
that little hiccup, I'm sure people wanted to make a clip out of, because he said my commander-in-chief, he made a mistake, correct himself, Secretary of Defense and Chief of Staff corrected himself. So little hiccup though. These are hiccups. They're not like terrible. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being generous, but I don't think I am, especially considering how he performed in the presidential debate against Trump. I thought Trump was awful, and I thought Biden had more substance, but I think Trump performed better, and Biden's performance was terrible. This one, I feel like his performance is actually pretty well. Like, maybe like that one clippable moment about saying Vice President Trump. But other than that, it's just hiccups, and then he kind of corrects himself right after.
And we're making a day-to-day basis on what they should and shouldn't, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related to
bad nights, sir. How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or it's a matter of foreign policy?
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself.
So what was
people that you won't have
question related to shouldn't how far defense and our intelligence people, and we're making a day-to-day basis on what they should and shouldn't, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related.
So he talks with his people to determine how far Zelensky should go. And then he talked about how he should only have the tools to really defend themselves and handle offense where deemed necessary, but any attacks further is too much. Okay. He didn't really make a hard stance about ending the war, but I mean, I'm not surprised, right? Okay.
To
be on a debate stage or it's a matter of foreign policy?
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's got more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? I created 2,000 jobs this last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet.
Good answer.
No.
Very strong answer. Very strong answer.
Who I got here? Merrick, Pulaski Radio.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm well.
The elections in the US have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron about you, and he said we are happy to have him as the President of the United States. But there is a concern. Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern that Donald Trump may weaken NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia.
They're correct.
And yourself was warning just 2 minutes ago about it. So my question is,
Yeah, there's a lots of terror with like Donald Trump and his internet foreign policy. Like his foreign policy is frighteningly problematic, especially with our allies. Like our ally relationships was just not good. It seemed like his best relationships was with North Korea and Russia. It was weird. So I can see why like a lot of European countries are very much concerned regarding this US election.
do you think that Europe
And if you remember during his presidency, he was talking about potentially ending NATO. Like,
will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election?
or
And
leaving
what's
NATO.
your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
Well, look, I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving? I've not had any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. He'd be a disaster. He'd be a
Okay.
disaster. I
I
mean,
mean, it's interesting, right? What is interesting is like social media is just a platform for clowning and making fun of things. Because a clip of Joe Biden having a remark saying, the European leaders wouldn't come up here and say, Joe, don't run. They would come up here and say, Joe, you gotta win. That's a bar. That's a clip. But of course, it's not gonna go as viral as Biden saying Vice President Trump. So, man, I look like a Democrat. I'm sorry. I'm not a Democrat.
where NATO, I just
I'm
learned
a
about NATO,
me.
something to that
Purple.
Foreign policy is
I'm a purple-crat.
And he seems
Purple
to have an affinity
Republican.
to people who are authoritarian. That worries, as I can tell you, from Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine. That that's going to be the end of it. And so, if he wins in Ukraine, Europe, that worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine. That that's going to be the end of it.
If he wins, another hiccup. He said if he wins in Ukraine, he'll stop Ukraine. That was a hiccup. We know what he meant though. If he wins, he's not gonna stop with Well, maybe I misheard him because he said authoritarian too. Hold on.
And learned about NATO or something to that effect. In one of his rallies, don't hold me to this, disaster. Can't let this guy come forward. European allies, how to win. Disaster. I mean, I think he said in one of his rallies, don't hold me to this recently, where NATO, I just learned about NATO or something to that effect. Foreign policy has never been his strong point. And he seems to have an affinity to people who are authoritarian. That worries, as I tell you, Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine. That that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job.
Yeah, that was a
Make
bad
sure that Ukraine
little
is
clip
not
quote.
that Ukraine
If he wins in
succeeds.
Ukraine and stopping
The
Ukraine. We know what he
European
meant though.
allies stay strong. You may recall, no one was talking about Finland joining NATO. I remember talking to Putin right after we got elected in Geneva, and he was talking about what we should do. We couldn't be in Eastern Europe, et cetera. And I said, you're looking for the Finlandization of Ukraine, but you're going to get the NATOization of Finland. And about 4 weeks later, I got a call. No, that's not true. Probably 5 months later, from the president of Finland, could he come and see me? Because in my office, I invited him to the Oval Office. We sat down and talked. He said he wanted to join NATO. Could I help? And I did. It wasn't automatic. And then I got a call from the Swedes. I beg your pardon? And so Finland joined NATO. 800-mile border is a significant.
Wait. What happened here?
Wasn't automatic. And then I got a call from the Swedes.
Oh man, I wish I could hear. What does this person say?
And then I got a call from the Swedes.
The what? Let me go one. I'm so curious what this guy said.
And then I got a call from the Swedes.
The something Europe. Okay, I don't know what he said, but he felt it necessary to interrupt Biden, which is interesting.
I beg your pardon? And so Finland joined NATO. 800-mile border is significant, and they're already allies, but they weren't part of NATO. And you heard, I think you heard, maybe I can't recall what he said in public in a closed meeting, but he wouldn't mind if he repeated. He said, we decided in Finland, the people of Finland decided they had to be part of NATO. It was in our interest because of the joint ability to be together, to dissuade any attack on Finland. And the same thing with Sweden. It took a lot of selling to some folks, particularly in Turkey and other places, to agree to the expansion. But it expanded. And we're a hell of a lot stronger because of it. We're more secure because of it.
Good response.
I was able to get 50 other nations, 50 to support Ukraine. 50. We were able to bring about a coalition of Europe and Asia, Japan and South Korea. I just met we talked about AUKUS, and we talked about the relationship between Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea.
Trying to get Oceania. Okay.
Making the world safer and stronger because we have to deal with the new arrangement that exists in the world. The Cold War is over. The post-war era is over. What is going to replace it? And I respectfully suggest I have a pretty good idea what that should be. I've convinced a lot of people to follow it. We're just going to get stronger. David.
Good response. Okay. Talks about how he helped help bring European leaders into NATO, and create a more unified entity. I think I don't know what I would say, but okay.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Be nice, David.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a broader partnership that seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now you will be able to go negotiate with them, handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit, and others raised, the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do, what they're doing with Russia in terms of accommodating, facilitating. They're getting access to additional. They're not supplying weapons themselves. They're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping.
I'm gonna have to rewind. I was kind of zoned out.
What they're going to do, and others raised, the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do.
This is an interesting question.
With Russia, in terms of accommodating, facilitating, they're getting access to additional. They're not supplying weapons themselves. They're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And
interesting.
China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has, over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that Xi believes that China is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things. What's happened is we had a long discussion about what we have to make clear China has to understand that if they are supplying Russia with information and capacity, along with working with North Korea and others to help Russia in armament, that they're not going to benefit economically as a consequence of that by getting the kind of investment they're looking for. And so, for example, we're in a situation where, and we've reestablished direct contact with China after that, remember the balloon, quote unquote, going down, all of a sudden things came to an end? Well, we set up a new mechanism. There's a direct line between Xi and me, and our military has direct access to one another, and they contact one another when we have problems. The issue is that we have to make sure.
This is a really interesting response.
There's a price to pay for undercutting both the Pacific Basin as well as Europe, and as it relates to Russia and dealing with Ukraine. And so for example, if you want to invest in China, as you know this area really well. If you want to invest in China, you have to have a 51% Chinese owner. You have to make sure that you do by their rules. And you don't have the authority, and you have to provide all access to all the data and information you have. There was a while there, as you recall, the last administration and other administrations, where the access to that market was enticing enough to get companies to come in because they had access to over 1 billion people in a market, not 1 billion, but a lot of people in the market. And so they were doing it. But that got curtailed when we started saying we're going to play by the same rules. For example, the idea they don't abide by the international rules related to subsidizing products by the government funding. So guess what? They're not going to be able to export their electric vehicles to the United States without a significant tariff. Others are doing the same thing around the world. But it is a concern. It is a concern that you have both China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, countries that are not necessarily coordinated in the past, looking to figure out how they can have impact.
Interrupt that impact?
Yes, I do, but I'm not prepared to talk about the detail of it.
Interrupt that impact?
So he really dove into what Russia, the Chinese relationship, what is. He said he had a relationship with China and Xi. He's saying that China is trying to increase their influence. Obviously, they want more countries to invest into them, and what model that they use, and whether or not that's a good model. He didn't really speak on that, but the fact that they're aligned with Russia would be problematic for their economy and their growth. He touched upon a lot of very interesting points, and then obviously someone just asked what kind of impact. I think what Joe Biden is referring to has to be like the BRICS alliance, right, between Iran, North Korea, Russia, China. And he's not going to talk about the impact of the BRICS alliance. I think that's fair. I don't think it's necessary to talk about right now.
Yes, I do, but I'm not prepared to talk about the detail of it in public. And I think you'll see that some of our European friends are going to be curtailing their investment in Russia. In China, as long as China continues to have this indirect help to Russia in terms of being this.
Okay, a few hiccups right now. Let me see if I can understand what he's saying.
Investment in Russia. In China.
Okay.
As long as China continues to have this indirect help to Russia in terms of being able to help their economy as well as help them in as a consequence of that their ability to fight in Ukraine. The other thing that we talked about.
Few hiccups, but I understood what he's saying.
And I raised it, and I didn't hear any. I can't swear that everyone agreed because not everyone got to talk about it, but we need a new industrial policy in the West. For example, we talked about how both the EU as well as NATO has to be able to begin to build their own munition capacity, has to be able to generate their own capacity to provide for weapons and the ability to. It came as a surprise to some of us how we had fallen behind in the West in terms of the ability to construct new material, new weaponry, new everything from vehicles to weapon systems. And so one of the things that came out of this was, we're going to be meeting again with a number of my colleagues, my European colleagues, is what do we do to increase the capacity of the West, particularly in Europe and Japan, to be able to generate kind of ability to produce their own weapon systems. Not just for themselves, but to be able to generate that. It's the same, it's what Russia's trying to figure out. They went to China and they didn't get the weapons, but then they went to North Korea.
Interesting.
We're going to be in a position where the West is going to become the industrial base for it to be able to, the ability to have all the defensive weapons that we need. That was a discussion as well.
You brought up a point on the value of, I don't know if he's referring to America becoming, is he trying to give these countries more of a sense of not sovereignty, because they are sovereign, but in a sense of independence in terms of not only providing their own level of defense, but he did say not to be for their own defense, but maybe also to provide for allies anytime. So it's not just America providing for, for example, a Ukraine or for an Israel. Maybe Japan or like other countries will have the more of a capability and responsibility, especially due to proximity, to provide for our allies. I wonder what exactly he's referring to. I'm not completely sure.
My freelancers on whether you would be ready to go deal with Putin and Xi 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm ready to deal with them now and 3 years from now. Look, like I said, I'm dealing with Xi right now and direct contact with him.
A little bit of a...
No good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in his behavior. And but there isn't any world leader I'm not prepared to deal with. But I understand the generic point is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior. And the idea, look, Putin's got a problem. First of all, in this war that he is supposedly have won, and by the way, I think, don't hold me the exact number, but I think Russia had 17.3% of Ukraine that they've conquered. Now it's 17.4. I mean, in terms of percentage of territory. They've not been very successful. They've caused horrible damage, loss of life. They've also lost over 350,000 troops, military, killed or wounded. They have over 1 million people, particularly young people with technical capability, leaving Russia because they see no future there. They've got a problem. But what they do have control of is they are very good at controlling and running the public outcry that relates to how they use mechanisms to communicate with people. They lie like hell to the constituencies. They lie like hell about what's going on. And so the idea that we're going to be able to fundamentally change Russia in the near term is not likely. But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it, read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about in Kyiv. It wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but so I think that I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. Last time I talked to Putin was trying to get him to work on an arms control agreement related to nuclear weapons in space. That didn't go very far. So my point is, I'm prepared to talk to anybody, but I don't see any inclination. There is an inclination on the part of the Chinese to keep in contact with me because they're not sure where this all goes. And look what's happened in Asia. We have strengthened the Asian Pacific area more than anybody else has. We just got together with, today I brought on, I asked our NATO allies that we bring on the group from the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Australia. I already mentioned Australia. And I met twice now, I think, with the 14 leaders of the Pacific Island nations. And we've slowed down.
Hiccup right there, too.
We've slowed down China's reach. But there's a lot of work to do. This is a moving target, and I don't take it lightly. Assam from NPR.
Thank you, Mr. President. Asma Khalid with NPR.
Response was pretty solid. He was very interesting when he talked about Russia and China. A little hiccups in the end when he talked about Putin. And but he's making an emphasis that he's still in contact with China and Xi, but he's not in contact with Putin right now. And he hasn't spoken to him for a while, but he would talk to him if he wants to talk, basically.
I have two questions. Earlier, you spoke about the ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas. We're now looking at 10 months of war, and I'm curious if there's anything that you feel personally you wish you would have done differently over the course of the war. And then secondly, if I may, I wanted to ask you about your presidential campaign. I remember covering your campaign in 2020, and there was a moment where you referred to yourself as a, quote, bridge candidacy, a transition to a younger generation of leaders. I want to understand what changed.
Two things. Let's go back.
Very interesting question. I really want to answer to the second question. I feel like the answer to the second question probably has to do with Donald Trump. Unfortunately, there's really no realistic... I won't dive into it, but I'm very curious on the answer to the second question. First question, if he could have done something differently. I'm curious to both. That was a really good question.
Back to we talked about would I have changed anything that's happening with Israel and the Palestinians and the Palestinian movement. The answer is, as you recall, from the very beginning, I went to Israel, but I also got immediate contact with al-Sisi in Egypt. I met with the King of Jordan. I met with most of the Arab leaders to try to get a consensus going as to what had to be done to deal with getting more aid and food and medicine into the Gaza Strip. And we pushed it really hard. And Israel occasionally was less than cooperative, number one. The Israeli War Cabinet,
I'm liking that he's honest about that, because I've been noticing Israel has been less than cooperative.
Dealing with Israel since Golda Meir. I saw some of the reporters around here coming all the time and heard me say this. The first time I met with Golda Meir, I sat across from her on her desk, and her assistant was Rabin sitting next to me. That's how far back I go. I know Israel well, and I support Israel. But this war cabinet is one of the most conservative war cabinets in the history of...
Ooh, he's being critical of Israel. This is very interesting. Okay.
Of Israel. And there's no ultimate answer other than a two-state solution here. And so what was able to be done in terms of the plan I put together was it would be a process for a two-state solution. And we get the Arab nations to, particularly from Egypt all the way to Saudi Arabia, to be in a position where they would cooperate in the transition so that they could keep the peace in Gaza without Israeli forces staying in Gaza. The question has been from the beginning, what's the day after in Gaza? And the day after in Gaza has to be, the end of the day after has to be no occupation by Israel in the Gaza Strip, as well as the ability for us to get in and out as rapidly as you can, all that's needed there. I've been disappointed that some of the things that I put forward have not succeeded as well, like the port reattached from Cyprus. I was hopeful that would be more successful. But that's why when I went to Israel immediately after the massacres that occurred at the hands of Hamas, the one thing I said to the Israelis, and I met with the War Cabinet and with Bibi, don't make the same mistake America made after bin Laden. There's no need to occupy anywhere. Go after the people who did the job. You may recall, I still get criticized for it, but I was totally opposed to the occupation and trying to unite Afghanistan. Once we got bin Laden, we should have moved on, because it was not no one's ever going to unite that country. I've been over every inch of that, not every inch, the entirety from the poppy fields all the way to the north. I said, don't make the same mistake we made. Don't think that's what you should be doing, is doubling down. We'll help you find the bad guys, Sinwar and company. And all this criticism about I wouldn't provide when the weapons they needed. I'm not providing 2,000-pound bombs. They cannot be used in Gaza or any populated area without causing great human tragedy and damage. But remember what happened when you had the attack on Israel with rockets and ballistic missiles. I was able to unite the Arab nations as well as Europe, and nothing happened. Nothing got hurt. It sent an incredible lesson to what was going on from the Middle East. So there's a lot of things, in retrospect, I wish I had been able to convince the Israelis to do. But the bottom line is we have a chance now. It's time to end this war. Doesn't mean walk away from going after Sinwar and Hamas. And if you notice, you know better than most, there is a growing dissatisfaction on the West Bank from the Palestinians about Hamas. Hamas is not popular now. And so there's a lot of moving parts. I just have to keep moving to make sure that we get as much done as we can toward a ceasefire, and get those. And by the way, look at the numbers in Israel. I mean, my numbers are better in Israel than they are here. Then again, they're better.
That's funny. That's a good one. That's a good one. That was a good
A
one.
lot of other people here too. But anyway,
Candidacy in 2020, you referred to yourself as being.
Yeah, I really want to answer. That was a good answer for the first question. I want to answer to the second question though.
Democratic leaders, and I wanted to know what changed.
what changed was the gravity of the situation I inherited in terms of the economy, our foreign policy, and domestic division. And I think, I won't put words in anybody's mouth. Most presidential historians give me credit for having accomplished more than most any president since Johnson and maybe before that to get major pieces of legislation passed.
He actually got a lot of legislation passed. And the one survey he was referring to during the presidential debate about like a bunch of like political experts grading every single president, he's actually ranked number 14. 14th best president. Trump is ranked last. And this has 50%, well, more like 40% Republican conservatives, 40% Democrat liberals, and then 20% moderate centrists.
Realized was my long time in the Senate had equipped me to have the wisdom on how to deal with the Congress to get things done. We got more major legislation passed that no one thought would happen, and I want to finish it to get that finished. If tomorrow, if we had a circumstance where there was a lineup and I hadn't inherited what I did, and we just moved things along. Anyway, it's going to change.
Last question.
So his point on why he changed his mind is that the situation was much worse than he expected, and it still needs a lot of fixing. And then once it is fully on a good status, then the younger generation will be able to inherit it and move forward. I get it. Whether you accept the answer is up to you, but I get the answer. Okay, I get the premise.
Haley Bull, Scripps. Or no, Josh Weingrove, I'm sorry. What's the next one? I'll do two more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Many of your colleagues, Democrats on the Hill, are watching tonight as they assess what they want to say about your candidacy. I'm wondering how you're thinking of this right now. It seems like your answer is clear, but they're watching how things go tonight, tomorrow in Michigan, next week in Texas and Nevada. Are you thinking that way about how the next week or two goes would inform your?
Am I using that way?
Are you thinking that way about how the next 2 weeks go? Will that affect your decision, or are you fully determined on running in November as the party's nominee?
I'm determined on running, but I think it's important that I allay fears by let them see me out there. Let me see them out. For the longest time it was, Biden's not prepared to sit with us unscripted. Biden's not prepared to, anyway. And so what I'm doing is, and I've been doing, I think we've done over 20 major events from Wisconsin.
So, I don't have a good basis. Is this something normal he does? Like, okay, I'm kind of done with my point. I might be rambling on, so I go anyway, so I can transition. Some people do that. Like that's like a normal language thing, right? You're rambling a bit, so you use a transition word to move on from your ramble to move on to the next point. I don't know if that's what's going on here, or if he just forgot, used the transition word and moved on. I can't say for certain. I don't have like a whole kind of a record of Joe Biden and his performances throughout his entire life.
Wisconsin to North Carolina, to demonstrate that I'm going out. So what I'm doing is, and I've been doing, I think we've done over 20 major events from Wisconsin to North Carolina to sit with us unscripted. Biden's not prepared to, anyway. And so let them see me out there. Let me see them out. For the longest time it was, Biden's not prepared to sit with us unscripted. Biden's not prepared to, anyway. And so what I'm doing is, and I've been doing, I think we've done over 20 major events from Wisconsin to North Carolina, to demonstrate that I'm going out in the areas where we think we can win, where we can persuade people to move our way, or people are already there. And look, the other thing is, we have the most extensive campaign organization of anybody's had in a long, long time.
Interesting. So I used it twice. I can be overly diagnosing it, of course, but he did use it twice. but the points that were needed to be made were made. Like he said that I'm gonna get in front of the people. I'm unscripted. I'm visiting locales. I'm in people's faces. So he's saying the points are coming across. So it's hard to say.
We have well over 1,000 volunteers knocking on doors, making phone calls, making tens of thousands of phone calls. We have headquarters. I forget exactly how many. I don't want to cite a number and then find out I'm off. But we have scores of headquarters in all the toss-up states. We're organized. We're moving, and that's awful hard to replace in the near term. And so, and here's the other thing. I was in the Senate a long time. Very proud of what I've done in the Senate. I was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for a long time, and I was chairman, a ranking member, and chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I'm going to be going down to the Johnson Library. Anyway, I'm going to be going around making the case of the things that I think we have to finish and how we can't afford to lose what we've done or backslide on civil rights, civil liberties, women's rights. There's that little button we have. Control guns, not girls. I mean, the idea, we're sitting around, this where Kamala's so good as well. We're sitting around, more children are killed by a bullet than any other cause of death. The United States of America. What the hell are we doing? What are we doing? We got a candidate saying, promising, don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything. We got a Supreme Court that is what you might call the most conservative court in American history. This is ridiculous. There's so much we can do still. And I'm determined to get it done. It's about freedom. And by the way, I'll end this. Well, I'm not going to do that. Haley has to come up too. But
I'm going to skip this. I got something to do. I'll hear the last question and then...
Pledge to make you the official nominee. If they have second thoughts, are they free to vote their conscience?
Obviously, they're free to do whatever they want, but I get overwhelming support. Overwhelming support. I forget how many votes I won in the primary. Overwhelming. And so tomorrow, if all of a sudden I show up at the convention, everybody says we want somebody else, that's the democratic process. It's not going to happen.
Even if that means they vote for someone else?
Sure. Look, I'll end this with this. I served in the Senate a long time.
Said that a few times. What? It's pretty normal, I guess. I repeat myself all the time.
And whether they think the topic they can help them or not. In my state of Delaware, which was a very...
I don't think he's really going to say anything else. I got to do something, but that's all we got for today. I thought Joe Biden performed pretty well. I'm not going to lie. I thought there was really only one bad hiccup, like the Vice President Trump, like that is getting memed, which was a bad kind of hiccup because we know how clip culture be. So, but other than that, I mean, overall, he had a lot of good answers. On point, sounded like he had conviction in his tone and in his voice. So overall, I thought he did pretty well. Let me know what y'all think, of course. If you disagree with like Joe Biden's positions, that's fine. You can disagree with his positions. But in terms of what he said, how he said it, and his competency, the optics, I thought it was done pretty well today. So with that said, hope you guys enjoyed. Y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.